and I was doing a past life regression, and the guy said, "What's going on with your lower belly? Like that spot? There's a spot on your lower belly. Is there a scar there?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah." He's like, "Yeah, because I guess I was stabbed. I was a woman in a past life and stabbed in that spot." So ashamed of the human being that I was that I could not take reality, and so I would drink. I would end up drinking for 3, 4, 5, 6 days at a time, doing cocaine, ending up in jail. And it got to the point where 2009, I jumped off the second story of a balcony in a bar and landed on the pavement below. I've come to recognize that all of our physical dis-ease comes from emotional dis-ease first. And so just last year, actually, I had my third recurrence of oral cancer. I went to see 2 doctors beginning of November, and they both looked at it and they were like, "Yes, that's absolutely cancer. Like, we need to get a biopsy really quickly, like within the next 6 weeks." And in that moment, I knew this is not a physical thing. I knew that this is not the beginning of something, this is the end of something. On the last night of ayahuasca, for the last 4 hours, I was shown every experience in my life where I have felt shame, embarrassment, shame, guilt, remorse. And I came back from that trip to Costa Rica, got the biopsy done, and the cancer was gone.
Sam, thank you so much for being here.
My friend, great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
For the listeners, it was Sean McDevitt, who was on episode 11, who suggested at the end of that podcast that I reach out to you. And I was just saying before we hit record that I had a quick look, I felt the energy, roughly saw kind of what your message was, and I was in. It was a recommendation from Sean. I got the feel, and I'm just looking forward to kind of getting to know you and your story and what got you to where you're at right now, and the value you bring, how you serve, and all that good stuff.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. Thank you for seeing me like that, and the resonance. I felt the same way. Sean, he reached out to me right after the podcast, and he's like, "Bro, you gotta check this guy out. You gotta get on the podcast. You two will just hit it off." And I did a little researching myself, and I was like, "Yep, this aligns."
Amazing. I love that. So Sam, could you give us like just a little overview of, first of all, kind of what it is that you do?
Yeah. So what I do is I work mostly with men. And what I like to say is that I teach men how to become a safe place, first within themselves, and then to hold the entirety of their life, mostly the feminine energy that they interact with. Feminine energy is life force. The feminine are literal portals. Everything that flows around us, the being of it all, is a feminine life force. And so as men, when we can expand our capacities, our nervous system, our somatic body, our ability to respond and not react, we can better hold all of that and be a good steward of it. Because if we're not a good steward of that, that's when men get reckless, and that's when things get hairy. And that's the reacting, not the responding. Now, I also work with women because a lot of women have been wounded by the masculine. It's not just this lifetime type of situation. It's the patriarchy. It's the witch wound. It's a lot of suppression of the women by the masculine for generations, and the entire lineages have experienced this. So a lot of women have this imprint on their DNA of distrust of the masculine. So what I do is I help women, feel safe in their own body, feel safe in who they are, that way they can step into a relationship with the masculine with full trust and full surrender and feeling safety.
Amazing. Now, for people that just think men masculine, women feminine, and might not understand the difference of actually masculine, feminine as an energy, could you give like a little bit more insight on that, just for clarity for people that might not be familiar?
Yeah, absolutely. So to make it really simple, masculine is the doing energy, the taking action, the achieving, the legwork, that kind of stuff. The feminine is the being energy, the receiving energy, the being in flow energy. And so a lot of times, a lot of women I find that have been wounded, for example, will be heavy into their masculine energy, because it is both energies are needed, but I can't trust the masculine energy, so I'm going to go ahead and do it myself. And then that takes away from them being able to be purely in their feminine essence. Now, so women, masculine and feminine, have two core wounds. The feminine wound is, I am too much. I am too needy, I am too emotional, I am too sexy, I am too, you name it. The masculine wound is, I am not enough. So I'm not good looking enough, I'm not big enough, I'm not wealthy enough, I don't drive a nice enough car, I don't have a great enough job. Like, it's a not enough thing. So the men, the response to that is, the men will overdo. They'll overdo and overachieve, and then forget about the rest and the being and the peace and the stillness of things. Now, women, I am too much. So what they'll do is they'll almost sell themselves out in a way that things have to get done. So what they'll do is they'll back off of their feminine energy, get heavy into their masculine energy, and end up overdoing themselves. So what that means is that you meet, there's a big thing around now about boss bitch, like using that term of like taking care of everything myself. And I mean, go ahead and be a boss. Yes, absolutely. Take that ball and run with it. And at the same time, the feminine thrives when they're in their feminine essence of being, when they're in that feminine essence of receiving and being led in the bedroom or on the dance floor or wherever it may be. It's when it gets out of balance is that when we run into problems. So the out of balance is the out of balance of the being and the doing.
What do you think it is that's kind of led us to this point in society? Because it seems like we're in that more than ever, but it does seem like there's hope coming through with more and more people starting to bring awareness to it.
Yes, absolutely. There's more people bringing awareness to it. I mean, this conversation, I have this conversation a lot. And then what's funny is that it's a bit of a bubble. I have the community here in Austin, or meeting guys like you or Sean, like, that are aware of these conversations. The conversations are getting had. I go outside of these circles to, friends from college or friends I grew up with that aren't in this kind of conscious world. And the conversation it's a little confusing to them, a little bit esoteric for them. And so I think that the expansion of this conversation is what gets to be had about the mutual respect and the compassion and the empathy. And I think what happened, where it got skewed, as you asked, was, I think over time, there was a while where, women were revered in society. Ancient Egypt, Leonidas with the 300, he picked those 300 men because of the women that they were associated with, married to. And so, over time, it got to the point where women were, with in the 20s, when women were suppressed, and it was like, in the kitchen, and that kind of like conversation about a woman's place is in the kitchen, or that kind of thing. And like, this got really heavy, and a lot of men really, really kind of went headfirst into that. And it through wartime and through a lot of generations where sensitivity or vulnerability, that kind of thing, was not, it was not looked highly upon, but it was also a little bit dangerous. And so that fed that, and that momentum got rolling, and that ball got rolling. And so over time, women ended up being very, very wounded, very, very distrusting, and a lot of evidence. There's a lot of evidence throughout time, and there's still a lot of evidence of men behaving badly, and towards women, and honestly towards other men. It's a scary proposition to be around a dangerous man, a man that you don't feel safe around. And so there's certain men, certain situations that say, look, all men are scary. Look, men are scary. And so what we're doing now is having these conversations. We're moving away from that. We're saying, look, not all men are scary. There are some out there that have done scary things and been scary energy. And there's a move back to center on this.
Do you think, like back in the 20s, when we weren't, let's say, relationships were based on roles, because that really was the model of relationship for a very long time, wasn't it? It was a man has his role, a woman has his role, and together we have these roles that we both play out. Do you think women were actually more in the feminine when they were in that role? Because it seemed like men were maybe more in the masculine then.
Um, I think yes, and it doesn't feel like it was a sustainable approach. Because it didn't that's not where we're at still, right? And so I would say that there is the whole conversation around dropping testosterone and men being feeling emasculated. There is pendulum swing, right? And so the pendulum swings in one direction, it swings back in another direction, and then it's the thing is find the balance at the center of the pendulum. And so, yeah, I would say that it was probably a little too far into the separation of masculine and feminine,
Yeah.
where women began to build resentment around it. And I would say that there may have been resentment on both sides. I mean, not being alive then or knowing, just knowing how it all played out. Like we can look back and see how it played out. It appears that the gender roles that as they were back then were a little bit extreme as far as what is masculine and what is feminine.
It seems to me with a lot of movements where we move away from something, to your point with the pendulum swinging, that sometimes we throw the baby out with the bathwater, where there are actually maybe some elements of the old which were actually in their light that were good, and then there were elements that were in the shadow. And I think it's the shadow elements of those dynamics we want to move away from. For example, not having a choice, you have to do this, is very much the shadow of that.
Yeah.
Not having the right to vote or have a mortgage for a woman in the shadow, right?
Yeah.
And it seemed as though a little bit like we kind of got rid of all of it, where it actually seems now that women are left where they have adopted the masculine role, where maybe, let's say a man and woman who've had children together, maybe they separate. Very often it can be the woman who's left to do the being and the doing, where they're having to cover the bills, the mortgage, the look after the kids and go to work. And it seems as though we kind of got to this point where the response to something that was noble and right and had to happen almost seemed like then some men responded to that by abandoning masculinity. And it seemed as though like we haven't got to the point yet where, and maybe this is what this conversation is, where we go, hang on a minute, hang on, we went from this, now we're at this. How do we find this healthy balance where we're in the light of it in its entirety, and we've abandoned the shadow, not the whole thing?
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And one thing that was coming in when you're talking there is that shadow versus light, pain versus pleasure, or however you want to look at it. We as human beings are programmed to pay more attention to the negative stuff because we don't need to protect ourselves, essentially protect in quotes from the light, whereas the shadow's like, well, watch out for that. So I think that when we talk about the historical nature of this, it's easy to go to like, oh, look at all the shadow stuff. Look at all the bad stuff that came from that, because that's the reptilian brain that's saying like, oh, there's a saber-toothed tiger around the corner, and the saber-toothed tiger, again quotes, has evolved from whatever it was in the early 1900s to what it is now, where it's a negative comment on Instagram or something, anxiety. And so the way to shift all this is to heal. We get to look at our wounds. We get to look at do the shadow work. Do the work so that instead of going running with the shadow or living in the shadow, you get to shine the light on the shadow and say, you know what, I know there's a better way, and maybe I'm not showing up that way right now. Maybe I'm not capable of showing up that way right now, but I know it's there. and I know that's where I get to be, I get to go to. So let me do the work to get from where I am to there. And that's when we talk about healing 7 generations back and 7 generations forward. When we talk about doing this ancestral healing, these soul contracts that we come in with, we talk about like full deep acceptance of the journey that we are on in this lifetime. We all chose every moment of this. And so when you can, instead of resisting that, which is where a lot of, I think, resentment and anger and vitriol comes from, we can say, oh no, this is all here for a reason. Allow me to look at it and allow me to move towards my highest evolution of masculinity, my highest evolution of femininity. And where do we all internally, externally get to meet in the middle?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because when I observe conversations, even with people that I know, that are men, and I see, well, both men and women, there's always a tendency to want to side with the thing that we identify as or is most alike us. And it's really interesting when you see, people just automatically, like autopilot, to want to either defend the position of men because they are one, or women to defend the position of women because they are one, and not actually be able to kind of zoom out and take a look at the whole picture just from the perspective of observing to say, yeah, what is going on here in the entirety, rather than the autopilot thing, thinking, if there's a statement which is a lot of men have like either struggle with masculinity or the issue with the patriarchy, and they go, well, patriarchy, that's, well, I'm a man, then there's almost a need to defend that position, which I find really interesting. Now, I don't know if this is a factor, but from years ago in one of my ayahuasca journeys, I was shown and experienced, like in the most vivid detail, many past lives where I was a woman. And I don't know if that helps me, because part of my belief is my past included being a woman.
Yeah.
So I actually seem to view it more like neutrally, because whilst I identify as a man in this life, I firmly believe I've been a woman in past lives as well as men in past lives.
Yeah.
But that seems interesting how, like, part of the wound almost seems to be this, like the collective ego wanting to defend what it identifies as.
Yeah, you brought that up. Like, I've had the same experience with being a woman in past lives. I actually have a scar on my lower belly that is from a bike. I fell off a bike and the pedal kind of gouged me, and I was doing a past life regression, and the guy said, "What's going on with your lower belly? Like that spot? There's a spot on your lower belly. Is there a scar there?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah." He's like, "Yeah, because I guess I was stabbed. I was a woman in a past life and stabbed in that spot."
Wow.
And so I totally agree with you about like having that remembrance, in the cells, in the DNA of like, okay, I kind of can identify a little more with that experience than some others maybe. And I think that compassion is it. Like we can say, as the white man, like like we can say we have this compassion for Black people or Asian people or any kind of person of color or women, and it's looked at as, yeah, but you're not, like, you don't know. And it's true. And so that conversation of almost getting compassion thrown in your face a little bit will lead to like the human need to defend. Like, okay, I got to defend not even me so much, but my historical position. And I think that's where things get a little hairy, is when it is that mine or is it not mine? Is that story mine or is that story not mine? And so women the same way. Like, women have this history of suppression with witch wounds and the patriarchy, and a lot of women will carry it, and they've experienced it in this lifetime as well, and they'll carry a bigger version of it and kind of hold it in their quiver. And so, and men do this too. Men have these arrows in their quiver that they hang on to about whatever it is, whatever story they make up about being abused or being imprisoned or whatever it is. And so the idea, this comes back to the healing, is that how much of it is actually true for me, how much of it is me operating again from the shadow, falling back into that default programming that may be not serving the situation or the narrative or moving forward at all.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe also like, how much do I want to hold on to it?
Right. I always say, do you want to get it right, or do you want to be right?
Mm, yeah, yeah. One of the things that came up when you were talking about early on, I kind of just jotted this down, and you said about like men in the masculine to kind of hold women in the feminine. And the thing that I was going to ask is, and just something I've observed or seem to have noticed, is that it seems like a lot of women actually don't know what it is now to be in their feminine. Like it seems like it's so out of touch and connection. And even in some of the movements, for example, like to defeat masculinity might be a narrative, but defeat in and of itself is masculine energy.
Mm.
And it's like even the movement to try to bring more balance to the feminine is actually masculine energy. It's kind of like lighting a fire to try and put out a fire.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that um, when we talk like that whole idea of fighting fire with fire, it really, this is kind of, again, you can take that maybe one step further and say, um, holding on to that anger or that vitriol or that story is the analogy of holding on to a hot rock and expecting the other person to get burned.
Mm,
And it's like, I'm holding on, I'm going to throw this hot rock at you, but I'm going to hold on to it and use it as my fuel, and yet my hand is on fire, my hand is blistering. And it's
yeah.
like, and it's at what point do we put the rocks down and start having conversations about this? And this goes back to the safety. At what point, because this is really this whole gap that's been created, or these attacks that are happening, are feeding the unsafety of the connection, of the dynamic between the men and the women. So at what point do we get to say, uh, let's, and there's tons of ways to have, like, if you want to micro it down, to have a conversation. But the thing is at what point do we say, like, let's invite this conversation in and say, okay, so you're a woman and you're angry at men in general for reasons, or men, you're angry at women in general for the reasons you have. At what point do you get to say, okay, I have my reasons, I have my experience, I'm willing to do the work to heal from that, and I'm also willing to acknowledge that there's maybe another experience out there, that the one that I've had or that I cling to is maybe not the absolute truth of the whole situation. It's just it's an experience that I had, that I made up some story that meant something about me, identified. So now I identify as as the wounded man, or the feminine, the wounded feminine. And this, now we're getting into victim consciousness, and like all the things, that the payoff that comes from being that, holding on to that, the payoffs that we get, being right. Anytime that I put some stuff on Instagram sometimes, and it's like, it's this conversation, and just some women just coming in hot. Other men are like coming in with like, oh, you're just trying to get girls on Instagram by posting this stuff, and it's like, yeah, no, that's not really what's happening here. And so you see, like, the conversation itself brings the shadows and the wounds to the surface, and then
Yeah.
it's about, okay, bring the conversation on. Like, let's be willing to have the conversation without throwing barbs and throwing arrows at each other.
Yeah, I mean, it really feels like the way that begins is doing the personal work, isn't it? Actually healing the things that are going on in us, because I truly believe to the extent in which you're able to accept and love yourself is to the extent you're able to accept and love others, regardless of gender or how similar you are, just as a whole. But I think really, if we can only accept and love ourselves at a 2 out of 10, I think our level of acceptance and love for others reflects it.
100%. I mean, that, if you think about, like, say, like the 10 is all your bandwidth, right? If you're using only a 2% of your bandwidth or 20% of your bandwidth to love yourself, that means 80% of your bandwidth is taken up by negative hatred, using hatred or violence or shadow. And so if that's, again, and now we get into like subconscious stuff, like 95%. So you're roughly 95% is stuck on anger, unlovability, distrust, unsafety. And so that's driving the show. It's driving the car. And so, shift that. Like, everyone's got their doubts. Everyone's got their moments where they look in the mirror and just like, I do not like that. And, we all go through that. It's a human experience. And the more that we can understand that's not the truth, maybe on the certain day, you don't look your best. You're not feeling your best up here. That doesn't determine the amount of love that you get to give yourself. It doesn't determine the love for yourself needs to be the most unconditional love that you've ever experienced. And so if we can heal to the point where even on our worst days, we say, you know what, today's a bad day and I still love myself. And that, and mean it, and not just give it lip service, just really understand that, like, maybe on that day it's love yourself more. I mean, a lot of the guys I work with, like, the reason we hold on to that, 80% of self-doubt, self-limiting beliefs, self-hatred, is because there's all these versions of us that have existed for 20, 30, 40 years that we've exiled because, I didn't like the way I was treated by that girl, or I didn't like the way my friends treated me, or I didn't like the way that I treated that girl. I went through that a lot with addiction and alcoholism. Like, I was not the greatest guy to girls through that whole addiction. Even to my friends, I was not the greatest guy to be around, period. And so for a long time, it was like, get this part of me out of me, just get it out. And it's the opposite of that. It's how do I incorporate more of that? How do I let that be inside of me without hatred and without desire to exile it and push it down? And that's where all the healing comes from, is understanding self-forgiveness, self-compassion, self-love. And then once that happens, then it's like, now I'm to the point now where I see in the public, or like, you can name any one of these people, men or women, that are, quote unquote, behaving badly. I immediately see wounding. Like, I don't see that person that's a bad person. I'm just like, that person's wounded. Tiger Woods is a great example of it. Like, the wounding that guy carries around is got to be just tons and heavy on his shoulders. That's why his body's breaking down now.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm the same. And even with, I was in Tulum a couple of months ago, and just kind of, I saw a lot of ass implants and lip fillers, and there's some of my friends that would like point out how much they didn't like it and like highlight it, like, oh, look at that. And I almost felt compassion and like, almost like, and I wouldn't do this because it would almost be condescending or patronizing, but genuinely what I feel when I see it is, I want to say, like, the beauty and the depth of your soul, like, there's so much more there than you could ever imagine. Like, please see it. Like, I wish you could see the awe and magnificence that's actually inside you, because I feel like, and I'm not talking about a little bit, I'm talking about, when they've gone like extreme.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it seemed like a level of dysmorphia, whereas maybe they aren't seeing it that maybe the way everybody else is. And I might be wrong in saying that. I'm open to being wrong, but it almost, I actually kind of feel compassion when I see that, and almost like, I have a daughter, and she's 6, and I think, at some point she's going to be a woman, and I just hope she has like a sense of self that's rooted in who she is in her being, to not necessarily feel like that's required to be better.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that speaks a lot to the expansion of this conversation, is that your daughter's now going to, like, that woman in Tulum with the ass implants and the lips, and guys doing the chest implants, they weren't part of a conversation like this growing up. And so that's where, and they experienced some wounding or something. And your daughter being present with you, she's going to be part of a different conversation. And that's where real change happens, is when we can expand this conversation into the next generation. And this is why you do the work with ayahuasca and you do the work on yourself. That's the first generation forward of the 7 that are coming that get to be healed by you doing the work. And then, and same as it goes backwards 7 generations too. And that's when the epigenetics of it all changes and the stories end. And so I think that, that's beautiful. Like that awareness and that acknowledgement, and, kids are so important.
So important. Yeah. Do you have kids?
I don't know.
It's a wild experience, and maybe one of the most, because I really make an effort to be conscious. It's amazing actually how much I will think things through after, because her mum and I aren't together. So if she's been with me and then she'll go, to her mum's after, and I'm thinking like, should I have said this in that way? It actually feels like a little bit of a trap sometimes, trying to be very conscious and thinking about how you're showing up, especially if you feel like some of the things you've had to work through may have been related to like, parental dynamics.
Yeah.
It's kind of wild how much you can think about that. And I feel like I've actually got to probably still navigate that in a way where it's not overwhelming to think like, should I have said that? Oh no, what effect might that have?
Yeah.
Because that's definitely something I think, there are some parents that are completely unconscious doing the thing, but then I feel like there's almost like a level of hypervigilance that starts to take place. And there's probably a balance that I need to find there.
Yeah. Again, like I don't have kids, and my past 2 girlfriends have both had kids, around 4 to 6 years old, 4 to 8 years old. And I can see that, like what you're talking about with like, oh my God, like every little thing that I say, do, the way I look, like whatever I do is imprinting on this child. And I think that the awareness of that is what is the important part of it, because that's going to catch most of the unconscious stuff. And then I think that you recognizing like, when am I being, overly harsh on myself or like overprotective of the child? Because I firmly believe that every soul is going to get the experience they came here to get. And you as the parent get to be the parent and hold that soul until it's 18 or 21 or whatever, however long that is, ever. And I firmly believe that there's no amount of overly protective behaviors that a parent can exhibit to save that child from pain or whatever it came here to experience. And I'm speaking from my personal direct experience of this in my lifetime here. Yeah. And so I just believe that that's honoring that soul contract. And you, that soul too, like your daughter, that soul chose you to be her dad. And she said, I'm going to choose this guy to hold me for the next 18 years or 21 years, whatever it is. I'm going to hold this guy. This is the man that I'm going to choose to guide me in. And there's beauty in that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a realization which seems obvious, but I wonder how many parents actually have it whilst there is this dynamic of very clearly adult, very clearly child. But at some point, God willing that I'm around this long and it goes to this plan. But at some point, I could be a great granddad and she could be a grandparent. And our dynamic isn't going to be adult and child. It's going to be old man with older lady who has grandchildren.
Yeah.
And I actually sat and really kind of thought about that. And I was like, yeah, that is wild. Like the dynamic we have now is not the dynamic we're always going to have. At some point, we're both going to be older people. Maybe she'll be retired and I'll still be around. And it was actually quite a wild realization.
That is quite wild to realize. You're like, whoa, what's that? Like that's an interesting one. You're both going to be, there's a period where you're both going to be, adults.
Yeah.
And doing your own thing. And it's, wow. It's interesting to think about it like that, like
Yeah,
the potential of it, like the layers that exist.
I think the nice thing about that is some people just see it as my children, but at some point, again, hopefully, she'll have children and maybe grandchildren, and I'll get to see that. And it's not always going to be this dynamic of adult child. Actually, we're going to have this lifelong relationship where the dynamic is actually going to be evolving the whole way through. And I see it now as a 6-year-old, and actually it does make me think that's amazing that there's so much to come, and this dynamic that will constantly be evolving
Yeah.
is actually pretty it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I can hear you talk about it, and I agree with you. And I will not have that experience. I don't have a daughter, so
Yeah,
you know, I sending you all the love and energy on that journey, because
yeah, thank you,
it's going
man.
to be beautiful.
What got you to this point, brother? Like, what was your journey like that got you to doing what you're doing now? Because let's be honest, this isn't the everyman type of thing. The things that you and I are on, I assume it's normally created out of an interesting journey to get us here. So I'm intrigued.
Yeah, interesting is the word for it. So as we're this perfect segue, as we were just talking about how um, no person, parent, girlfriend, boyfriend, brother, sister, friend can save another person from the experience they came here to get. And so my experience, I've come to the conclusion through, in ayahuasca and other plant medicines and my own work. I'm a big fan of psychedelic plant medicine work, and I'm almost a bigger fan of human work, doing the work purely as a human being. I think that that's where most of the magic happens. But and through these ayahuasca journeys and bufo and other things, I've had some massive realizations about my experience as a human. And so one of the things is that my spiritual journey started from the second I was born. I was born with constricted breath. So I was severe asthma, severe allergies. And then for the first like 13 or 15 years of my life, I had this tendency to choke on my food. So like a piece of meat or some chicken or salad or even would get stuck in my throat, and I'd have to have the Heimlich maneuver done. So I had this thing where I came here to experience this. This was not, talk about like, if you believe that everything happens for a reason, and all souls are divine and the path is divine and everything's for us. How do you explain childhood illness? How do you explain child with cancer? How do you explain child with asthma? So my experience was that, I didn't, you could say like someone smoked cigarettes or whatever, and they were a bad person and something, the law of karma, and something bad happened to them. As a child coming in, like you haven't had a chance to do anything bad yet. And yet I still had this severe health issues growing up. Now, if you had asked me prior to 2009 or 10 about my childhood, I would have told you it was the most amazing thing ever. There was very little fighting in my household. My parents got along. We went on trips to the Bahamas and Florida and New York City and all these places. And I played golf and tennis every summer and was skiing in the winters and went away to boarding school in Florida. Like I had an amazing childhood. And then I had to look at, so I also had addiction later in life, from about age 20 to 38. And, you sit in rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, or you sit in any sort of recovery conversation, and you hear people talk about this sexual abuse, these alcoholic homes, these, absentee parents, and like all these stories that are like the common markers of addiction and alcoholism. And I'm sitting there listening and like, how am I here? Like, I don't have the normal path to get here. Wasn't here for me, with like hearing all these other stories about the physical, sexual abuse, the verbal abuse, all that stuff. So I was invited to look deeper into my childhood and say, okay, yes, I had a very great experience. And this is why I can say from experience that no matter what parents do, no matter how the household is, the child, that soul, is going to get its experience on this planet that it came here to get. My experience was to do some massive, massive healing for what I know now is one of the people is my grandfather, my mom's father. That's one of the people that I am representing here. My soul is representing his healing. My soul is representing my dad's healing. So my two grandparents, my two grandfathers, I'm here to do some massive healing for them. And I'm good with it. I've come to that acceptance that this is what I came here to get. This is what I came here to do. And it's been it's not an easy journey, and it's also been very beautiful and very rewarding. And so when I look deeper into my childhood, you're looking at the effect, the experience of having this severe asthma and allergies and choking was set like a lot of layers to it. One is that it was constant survival mode. There was no time for me. Like, yeah, I was a kid. Like, I ran around and rode bikes and did all the sports and played with my friends. And in the back of my head, that we talk about the bandwidth, like a lot of my bandwidth was being used up by, am I going to have an asthma attack today? And am I going to eat a peanut today? Am I going to choke on this food that I'm eating? So I had these, this conversation that I was experiencing in childhood, and it was by all accounts great. And then also recognizing now what I know is that there was a massive fear building in me. And with that also came a lot of shame. A lot of feeling very different than my peers, a lot of being like a physical evidence of like, okay, my peer group, they can run around in the field. I grew up in Vermont. They can run around on the farms where all the hay and the horses are without having an asthma attack. For me, pollen season, horses, cows, hay, that's a sure allergic reaction or an asthma attack for me. And so was not fun for me to go to birthday parties and to hang out with these kids. And because I was in such fear that I was essentially going to die. Like my life was in threat all the time. And so when I was so this meant like team sports were hard for me. This meant I felt like a burden a lot of times. So kids would bully me by, throwing peanuts at me or making fun of the way I was breathing. And they would, not exile, but I just felt on the outsides. I didn't feel in, I didn't feel like I was in it. I felt outside. So I would actually get asthma attacks before birthday parties because my subconscious was like, we're going to sabotage this. We're going to give you a reason not to go. And so I found what was one of my saviors growing up was tennis. So when I was about 6, 7 years old, I started playing tennis, and it was, I all the things aligned, and I was really good at it. I had really good eye-hand coordination. I was fast. I could move, and I loved it. I loved playing tennis, and a lot of it was because it wasn't a team sport, and I could do it outside of the quote unquote, the social setting. So the social anxiety that I was beginning to experience that I didn't know was social anxiety at the time was, when I had more important things to do, like play tennis, that didn't exist. So tennis became my priority from age 6, 7 till 24, 23 when I graduated college. And that's when I played all through college. I played number one for my college, played a couple little smaller pro tournaments. And then as the tennis ended, that's when the alcohol kind of crept in. And so that was about, again, age 22, 23 until 38, where it was a steady kind of decline into jail. I was in jail for 8 nights one time, 9 days, 8 nights, 6 trips to rehab, various trips to the hospital for alcohol poisoning, a lot of like this just destructive behavior and, reckless destructive behavior, which for me, what I know now is it was all fueled. Like I was so ashamed of who I was, so ashamed of the human being that I was, that I could not take reality. And so I would drink. And when I drank, all that would fall away, and it would be fun. It was fun to be around other people, and it was fun to talk to girls, and it was fun to get on the bar and do karaoke and all these things. And over time, I was the only one. I would end up drinking for 3, 4, 5, 6 days at a time, doing cocaine, ending up in jail. And it got to the point where I was almost addicted to that alternate reality, more so than I was addicted to the actual substances. And cocaine and alcohol were what kept me in that alternate reality of the non-shame fueled. And so the shame got so bad that in 2009, I jumped off the second story of a balcony at a bar and landed on the pavement below. And this is what I was told, because I don't remember any of it. I woke up in the trauma unit the next morning, and they told me what had happened, that I fell off the balcony. And so this was 2009. So years went by where I was, I accepted that story as I fell off the balcony. I was super drunk and just fell over the edge. What it actually was a suicide attempt. And that came to me in an ayahuasca ceremony one time. Is that I was like, I had been shown the depth of my shame. And then I was like, okay, so show me how this is manifested in my life. And then ayahuasca, it was in Peru, middle of the Amazon, 2, 3 in the morning, like pitch black. And all of a sudden the Maloka just got light, like it is in this chat right now. And it was like, that was a suicide attempt. And for me, like, I tell people this and they're like, oh my God, you must have been freaked out. For me, it was like a weight had been just removed from me. I was like, oh gosh, like, thank you. Thank you for making sense of all this, like making sense of the way I felt for 40 or 45 years, like making sense of all this. And this is when, you think, for me, I thought, like, you find these things out, it's like, oh, it's a death sentence. No, it's the statement of, when you find your darkness and you shine light on it, it's no longer darkness. That's what it was. And so I was able to really look back at all these shame-fueled behaviors, just like people pleasing and putting people on pedestals and pandering in relationships and the drinking and just doing everything I could to just please choose me, please accept me, please see me, because that's not how I felt as a kid. And I was trying to make up for that. And, what I know now is that shame begins the moment that we feel a humiliation or a rejection around a basic need trying to be met. So for me, it was breathing. Like I would legitimately be made fun of for the way I was breathing when I had an asthma attack. So a basic need of breathing, like basically being told, you're not doing it right. We're not going to choose you for the team because you don't breathe right. So all of it wrapped up in one. And then that shame gets to die when I can come into a safe place and tell that story and tell my experience of that, it all lifts. And so throughout this journey as well, I've come to recognize that all of our physical dis-ease comes from emotional dis-ease first. And so just last year, actually, I had my third recurrence of oral cancer. And the first two were in 2009, 2011, and they were based around the binge drinking. That was what was causing the oral cancer. And then I was cleared by doctors in 2018. They said, unless something massive happens, like the spot in the mouth there, like really changes, you don't have to come back. And so when I went to do the ayahuasca in 2021 and this shame was revealed to me, that spot in my mouth changed. It got a little activated. And it's one of those things in the mouth where it's like, even the littlest thing feels like it's the size of your whole mouth. And so I kept an eye on it, and it didn't change much more after that. So I'm like, okay, I think it's pretty good. It's not growing. It's not getting anything better, any worse. And then last year I went to Burning Man, and after Burning Man, it was literally an open wound in my mouth, that spot. And so this was the doctor in my ear, like, if something ever happens with that spot, go see somebody. And so I went to see 2 doctors beginning of November, and they both looked at it and they were like, yes, that's absolutely cancer. Like, we need to get a biopsy really quickly, like within the next 6 weeks, and determine what stage it is and the treatment plan. And in that moment, I said, I knew this is not a physical thing. I don't physically like have cancer. I'm experiencing cancer right now, but I knew that this was, first of all, that it was not physical. And second, like, I knew that this is not the beginning of something. This is the end of something. So that shame that was recognized in 2021 spent the next 18 months leaving my body through this spot in my mouth. And so then beginning November, so end of November, I went down to Costa Rica to serve psychedelics that I serve and sit with ayahuasca. And the last night of ayahuasca, I was shown basically for the last 4 hours, I was shown every experience in my life where I have felt shame, embarrassment, shame, guilt, remorse. And I came back from that trip to Costa Rica, got the biopsy done, and the cancer was gone.
Wow.
And yeah. And so because it was the purging of that shame. It was like, the final boss in Mario. Like I had to just finally let myself experience this shame and let it out of my body. And that's been the most profound learning of probably of my lifetime, is that, we get to really move these things through our body. And as this healing goes, and whether it's, childhood illness or addiction that for me, it ended in 2012. And, that's when I started looking at all these things, the depression first, the anxiety, the mental illness side of it all. And then now it's become this really deep path of spirituality and plant medicine and consciousness that has allowed me to access parts of me and access beliefs and access ways of healing that are all wrapped into basically who I am now and what I do.
That's amazing, man. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you for asking.
It's so would you say that where you're at now began as just really trying to just get out of addiction, and then as you've gone along, the journey just went deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper until eventually, do you find that you went deeper? Like to begin with, it was like let's get out of hell almost, which might have been the addiction. And then it was deeper. Then maybe was there some like personal growth? Did you experience that before you then eventually found spirituality?
So yes, it was at first it was, so 2012, November 21st, 2012, it was like, okay, I'm very aware that there's addiction and alcoholism. And I'm also quite aware that there's other things that are fueling this, depression, anxiety. And so for the first 5 or 6 years, it was let me work through everything that I know about, like, as a human being. Let me work through everything that I experienced. So these are like heartbreaks that I've experienced, or shameful behavior that I've exhibited, pain I've caused my parents, pain I've caused my sisters, pain I've caused myself. Like, the 3-year cycle of bouts with depression, the ways I feel anxiety, these things that were really readily available to me to look at. And then at about 5 or 6 years, I was doing the work in Alcoholics Anonymous and going through that work, and I recognized that there were some patterns happening that kept coming back, that I was ready to be done with. It's not fun anymore. And mainly it was depression. And so I said, I need to go a different direction here, because what I need to know now is what I don't know. I've done 6 years of work on everything I know, and now I'm getting to like the second and third time of working on what I know. There's something I don't know about this that really, really gets to be known, so that I can purge this out of my vortex and move forward. And that's when that was 2019. That's when I got really serious about looking inward and saying, okay, because the stuff is it's an internal experience, but it's really it's an external result that you're getting. Experiencing depression, experiencing anxiety. Yes, it's an internal feeling. It shows up in your life as, financial or women leaving or whatever it may be. So in 2019, I had a really, really my girlfriend left, and it was a massive heartbreak. And it was the breaking point for me of, I need to do something different. And so that was when I got on this path of deep, deep spirit. I left AA. I said, AA is not for me anymore. I got into, first it was deep, deep spirituality. Then it was into plant medicines. And then, consciousness has been the overarching thing about the whole thing, about the healing that consciousness, healing the subconscious, healing the ego, inviting these parts back in. And yeah.
Amazing, man. When you were sharing the story about the asthma, I wildly had a memory that I had forgotten until just then.
Wow. You want to share?
Yeah, I'd pretty much forgotten that I had asthma as a kid.
Wow.
And 2 things came up. I was like, holy shit. There was one time, we were in London, and we live, 100 miles away from London. So we were in London, and at the time, the inhaler that I had, it's wild that I have this memory. I've not thought of this I can't tell you how long it's been. The inhaler, it wasn't like a spray that you kind of have now. It was capsules,
Yeah,
powder in that you'd put in,
I remember those.
and the air pollution was so bad, and it was on this hot summer's day, and I my breathing was really bad, and it was that bad that I couldn't take enough of a breath to inhale the powder out of the
Mm.
inhaler. So even the inhaler wasn't doing anything because I couldn't breathe it in. So that
Hmm.
just came back. And then another time I remember, wow, um, my, I must have been I must have been maybe 12, I would guess, at school. And I think sometimes what would happen is if my mum was late to pick me up, like late finishing work, I would just start walking in the direction that she would driving, and kind of she'd see me, and this was before we had like cell phones.
Yeah.
And anyway, she was driving the other way, and in my head I thought, oh, she's driven all the way down, has seen me, now she's driving back. So I start running to try to catch her, thinking she's gonna go, and thinking like, then what will I do? And then I remember having this asthma attack, and then feeling like, well, she's gone, she's not coming back. I couldn't breathe, and I'd actually forgot that I had asthma when I was a child until this conversation. How
Wow.
wild is that?
That's really wild, man. You never know. You never know when these things will pop up.
Wow, yeah, that's
That's
crazy.
crazy.
Yeah, as you were saying, I was like, it just started coming through. I was like, oh my god,
Yeah. Wow.
man,
That's
that's
wild, man.
insane. Um, Yeah, man. So you've really been on a journey, and then did you finally got to the point? I was actually talking about this earlier. It feels like, and this was the case for me, that when you start doing the deeper work and you start realizing where your things came from, it kind of gets to a point where you realize what is most personal is pretty universal, and actually just healing the individual consciousness, almost doesn't mean that much if you can't then try to do your part for healing the collective consciousness. And is
Yeah.
that how your journey has unfolded kind of to this point where you are doing your part in that way?
Yeah, I would not say, I mean, yes, I chose this, like this path to be here and to help other men heal. Um, I wouldn't say that I saw it looking like this by any
Mm,
stretch. And when you talk about like turning your mess into your message or your pain into your superpower, that when it comes down to it, and this kind of goes back to the core masculine wound of I am not enough, like most of the men that I talk to, and I say most, I mean, I have not met one yet that doesn't. I'm sure they're out there. Self-worth. It's I'm not worthy. And so when you talk about like, yes, like we all have like whether it's addiction or asthma or um, abuse or whatever it is, whatever the path is there, when we look back and when we have these experiences now, it's going to come down to very similar stuff. And when we can find other men, like when I can speak my truth, when I can speak my experience,
mm.
whether it's on Instagram, on a podcast, in a client coaching session, to give someone else that permission slip that they're not alone and it's okay to express what they're feeling. That's it, man. That's what it's all about. Because it's the way things blow up is when we don't have the spaces to talk about these things and feel these things. And for me, that blow up was addiction. There were moments like that. There was really not great things, like really angry or really sad or really, really destructive stuff was happening. And it was a boiling over because, growing up, being so sick, I learned that to be well mannered and really, really well behaved was the way that I was going to be not ruffle feathers and be accepted and be chosen. And so like basically, the shadow side of the good boy um, came out later in life. And so when we look back, however we got to a certain point where there's pain present in our life, to find someone else that understands and can hear and explain maybe why something's present or how to move through it. Yeah, like that's the whole thing. This is like, it's a lot like becoming really super wealthy. For most people, when they become super wealthy, the first thing they think about doing is, how do I give this all away? Like, how do I start helping how do I start giving this away to other people? Charity, helping friends, like, providing experiences for people, whatever it may be. When we heal, it's some people, I have chosen to step on this path of, okay, I have been through this. I know that my experience and the healing that I've done now provides an energetically safe place for other men to come and experience that as well.
Do you feel like in ways that it also chose you?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. That's kind of what I was getting in the beginning. Like, I started on this path as a personal trainer, and it was the first time in my life I've had that experience of, like, work doesn't feel like work. And so I think that me moving to San Francisco and starting completely over at 38, I said, sounds like fun to be a personal trainer. I wasn't like, oh, this is going to be my path. I still thought I was going to go back to commercial real estate at some point. No, like this path just kept me on it, and it kept evolving and it kept looking different. And then a couple of years ago, I landed where I am now, and it's been like, this is it. This is where I'm supposed to be, doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Absolutely. That path was like, the energetics of the path was like, come on over here. Like, you're on this is your path.
Yeah, I think that really seems to be the case for some people. I can say that's the case for me, and for anyone who's watching this, and I feel like the types of people that might be watching this are likely to be people that are similar to us. People resonate with certain people, and if they're watching this, there's a reason. And I'd say for anyone that's listening that might feel a whisper or a calling where they maybe feel like they're meant to be in service in some way, don't ignore it. Don't ignore it, because I think sometimes what we can do is, and I've experienced this, I actually put some of this path off for a long time because I kept feeling or thinking I'm not there yet. And to me, that there is like, I need to be perfection before I can help people address things that are going on for them. And then I realized, no, actually showing up authentically and talking about the things that I still face now, that's still where I might have worked through loads of it, but might still show up now and again. And when it does, like, I identify it, and here's how I try to work through it, and actually being really human. And that's a lot more relatable. And it feels like the kind of guru days are dying out. And actually, people just want to relate with other people that they can see this person has been on the path, but they're not looking for perfection.
Yeah. Yeah. And I totally agree with you. All it takes really is that you have to be 1, 2, maybe 3 steps ahead of somebody else before you can help them. It doesn't have to be 300 steps. Just if you say something, like if we said something on this podcast that someone else may have said on another podcast, 2 other guys may have said on another podcast, there's a person out there that did not hear what they said, but heard us in the way that we said it. And you could say it's like someone else that we can say as like more healed or more perfect or further, like bigger name, whatever it is. A lot of times there's a deafness that comes with that because people are there. You're right. There's not that connection. And so when we can humanize our words and our actions and our way of being, that's when, because that's when it becomes unselfish, and it becomes, I'm an invitation to say, come over here. Like there's healing here. There's growth here. There's peace and freedom here. And I think that comes from, being relatable and saying like, I'm struggling right now, and sharing that, and not saying, not falling into like the victim side of it all, but saying, you know what, the work is never done. I'm struggling. This is what I've learned. And this is how I work through it, and sharing that process and being open about it. I think that people see that and they're like, oh, whether they reach out and talk to you, whether they comment on your stuff, whatever it is, if you can spark action in them, that's it.
Yeah. I think it actually gives them, and I think you kind of mentioned this at some point as well, it almost gives them a safe space to lean into what's going on for them, or to hold it with maybe less shame and judgment, and to
Sure.
realize it's
Yes.
not just them. Hey, like, we're all experiencing things, we're all dealing with things, we've all experienced some type of trauma, or as Dr. Gaffney said, I think lack of attunement was
Mm.
was what he said. Like, we've all experienced that. I think when we realize that, and that it's addressing it and working through it, hey, like, actually, we can hold each other. We can hold each other through that journey, and you aren't alone. I think it's really important.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to feelings of oneness, feelings of wholeness, feelings of tribe. One of the basic human needs and biggest fears, the need is to be part of a tribe, and the fear is to be exiled from the tribe. So when we can see people that are experiencing what we've experienced, or someone that can verbalize or express something that the person that's experiencing it can't express, and it lands and it makes sense in their body in that moment, that's when that's the first tipping of the scales into the healing side of it. Because it's confusing to struggle, man. It's confusing to feel things like shame, and when you can't put a name on it, or you can't put you can't tap the words and the experience together. It's confusing. It's because if you don't know what's going on, like, where do I start? So when you hear someone give you a starting point, the relief is insane.
Yeah, man, it's it's really fucking confusing.
Yeah.
Like, it really is. And I think even for people that have been on this path for quite some time, it's still confusing at times. And actually, maybe you can add an extra layer of, like, what the fuck? I've been through all this. I
Yeah.
understand intellectually all the things that I do, and these things will still catch me out.
Yeah. 100%. Like, there's layers to it where it's like, at first there's this like, and everything is good and I get relief. And then it's like, 5, 10, 15 years in, and you're like, wait a second. This is like, I went through this 12 years ago. What the hell?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then,
yeah.
and the beauty of that is that, yes, 12 years ago, a similar thing was present, an experience was present. And now I have 12 more years of tools in my toolbox. And instead of lasting for 6 months or 9 months, maybe it's a week, 2 weeks. That last heartbreak in 2019, because I decided that this was my inflection point to really get serious about my shit. Normally I'd be in heartbreak for 18 months, like just beat down, no end in sight type of stuff. This one, 3 months, I was clear, and I was already into gratitude for it at about 2 months, and so it was because I had all that. I knew this was not something that I get to wallow in. It was something that I get to use as a catalyst to grow from, and it shrunk the process. I mean, 90%.
Yeah, it's wild the different ways we can deal with it, and the ways it can show up, and, like, the shadow of it. Because I know, like, for me, one of the things that I had to actually do was not wallow in it, but actually to experience. And the last kind of, like, separation that I went through, there was I actually really wanted to sit in it. I wanted to feel it, because part of my shadow and pattern of the past would to be just immediately find other women, just get on the dating apps. And I found that, like, I used to have a lot of quote unquote what other men might call success on dating apps. Like, I could download a dating app and have 500 likes within a week. And so my thing would be, okay, let's just go find some more women.
Yeah.
Which, of course, is fully in the shadow and actually not experiencing it. So for me, it was actually, no. I want to sit in this, and I want to feel what's actually coming up.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. That's a huge recognition of that's the pattern interrupt that it takes. You know, all these things, these recurring patterns that we experience in life, for you to recognize that pattern interrupt and saying, no, no, no. Like, I've been down this road before and this is what I do, and that's probably going to lead to this again. I'm done with this experience. Let me interrupt this pattern, do something different, and move forward.
And I still felt it. I still felt that I felt my thumbs twitching to do
Yeah.
it, to go back to what I knew that could offer me a sense of like, oh, I am okay. Like,
Yeah.
please, someone, will you just tell me that actually I'm okay?
Yeah. It's crazy the places that our mind can go, and that we can say, oh, that's a really great idea. And then I've had experiences like that where, like, that's a great idea, everything goes down, and then as soon as it's over, I'm like, oh, this feels terrible. Like, immediate feedback that was not a great idea.
Yeah, it's right there, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, something that you said, Sam, that I am going to take away from this conversation was no person can save another from the work they need to do.
Yeah, the work they came here to do.
Yeah. That was my big takeaway from this conversation, where I feel like that was very powerful. And actually, and again, other people that might be listening to this podcast, if you are someone that feels called to be in service, sometimes the shadow of that is feeling like it's our responsibility to fix and save everyone.
Yeah.
And in you saying that actually was some medicine for me in that moment, to go, oh yeah, it's not my, because there are certain people that like I sometimes, you know, encounter in my life where I feel like it is my responsibility. And what you said there was like, oh yeah, no, they came here to do that work, and I can hold space and I can show up as me, but it's their path. So thank you for sharing that, because that was good for me, man.
I'm really glad it landed. And on like further down that road is that, yeah, you can't save them, and you can also not make it worse for them. Like, you can also not pile on with more pain. You know, you can be a compassionate, kind human being on their journey as well. Leave people better than you found them.
I love that, brother. Where can people find you? For people that watch this, that have fallen in love and they want to connect, where can they find you?
Yeah, thank you. Best place is Instagram at Sam Gibbs Morris. That's 2 B's, GIBBS, at Sam Gibbs Morris. And the website is the same, samgibbsmorris.com.
Amazing. And is there anything else that you'd like to share? You know, is there anyone in particular that's watching this where you think, like, if they're feeling something in particular, like, reach out? Any kind of message?
Yeah, I mean, people feel stuck all the time. And I think that stuckness is not a thing. It's that the stuckness is a resistance to the next level of yourself. It's the stuckness that you're feeling, that you're making up. It feels good to say I'm stuck, but what it is you get to look at, why am I resisting the call forward, the invitation forward? And then once you get past the resistance to the next level of you, this is advice that I heard, excuse me, I don't even know how long ago, but profound, is always allow yourself to be a beginner in every day. I mean, you look at the greatest athletes, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Wayne Gretzky, all these guys win championships and then go back to the drawing board every year and allow themselves to be beginners. If you're on this path and you pop through a stuck level or a level and you get to the next level, allow yourself to be the learner for a little bit, and don't try and get to 10 years ahead in 10 days.
Amazing, man. Brother, thank you so much for your time.
Thank
It's
you.
been an absolute pleasure. I've really appreciated it.
Thank you too, brother. Thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to many more of these.
Yeah, thank you, man.
All right, brother.